This is flip video 4.6, the loanable funds market. This is our last financial market in unit 4. So we started with the bond market, last flip video was the money market, and now we're going to finish up with our loanable funds market. There is a copy of this handout right underneath this flip video on our Canvas page. So if you want to follow along, print it out and follow along, that would be a good idea. So we'll start by drawing our our loanable funds market at equilibrium and talk about all the labels here. So on our vertical axis, we have RIR, which is the real interest rate. So this is the interest rate that is adjusted for inflation. So our money market had the nominal interest rate, which included inflation. The real interest rate is going to be adjusted for inflation. When we take out a loan, we want to know what the real interest rate is. We want to know what our interest rate is actually going to be when we are taking out this loan. Or if we are a lender, we want to know exactly how much we are going to get in return from this loan. Our downward sloping curve is DLF. So DLF is our demand of loanable funds. The upward sloping curve is SLF. So SLF is the supply of loanable funds. On the horizontal axis is QLF, which is quantity of loanable funds. And then we have our equilibrium markers, QE and RE. So our demand of loanable funds represents our borrowers. So if you need a loanable fund, you're demanding a loanable fund. If you are demanding a loanable fund, you are borrowing money. So the demand of loanable funds is our borrowers. So this is going to be for our capital purchases. Remember, capital purchases, this is our investment spending, our IG spending. So whenever we need a loan or we're using that for expanding our business production, so machinery, equipment, real estate inventory, things like that. The supply of loanable funds, so people who supply loanable funds, how we create a supply of loanable funds comes from savers, comes from investors. So savers is like you and I. Whenever we put money in our savings account or in our checking account, we are creating a supply of loanable funds. That money is there to be loaned out. It's also investors, particularly foreign investors, so foreign countries or foreign companies that invest in the U.S. They're placing their money into our loanable funds market, that they would change the supply of loanable funds. So this would be our foreign investors. Could also be domestic investors as well. So we're going to start with looking at the shifters of our demand of loanable funds curve. So we're talking about things that are going to change our borrowing habits. So the first main shifter of our demand for loanable funds is government borrowing. So when the government needs to borrow money, that means we are increasing government spending, and taxes aren't able to cover their spending. So if they don't have enough money to spend, they're going to go borrow it, and they're borrowing that money from the loanable funds market. So when we have an increase in borrowing, so an increase in government spending, that's going to increase our demand for loanable funds. And this will happen when the government is at a deficit, when they're deficit spending. And then our second shifter of the demand for loanable funds is business outlook. So business outlook is just like consumer confidence, only this is business confidence. So this is all about investment spending, IG spending. So if we have a positive business outlook, everything's looking great, we're looking at expanding, we're going to have an increase in the demand of loanable funds. But if we have a negative outlook, it's not looking like things are going to open anytime soon. It's not looking like we're going to be able to expand. We're actually having to cut production. We're going to decrease the demand of our loanable funds. So I'll show the changes here. We're going to start at equilibrium in both boxes and then show our change in demand. And make sure you're labeling everything correctly. Some of us are having issues with labels, and labels are points, so please make sure you're labeling things. So we'll start with increase in demand first. So increase, we're going to go to the right. Demand of loanable funds 2. Quantity 2. And interest rate 2. So when we start to increase our demand for loanable funds, so increase in the demand for loanable funds, will increase our real interest rate. So we have positive business outlook. Things are starting to look better. We're going to increase our production. Or our government needs to increase their spending to get us out of a recession. So they need to go borrow money. Decrease in demand for loanable funds is going to go to the left. So demand of loanable funds 2. Quantity 2. And interest rate 2. So when we decrease our demand of loanable funds, we are decreasing the real interest rate. So it's a negative business outlook. It's not looking good. We're not looking at expansion options. Or our government's running out of surplus. They're not deficit spending, so they don't need to take out a loan, therefore decreasing that real interest rate. Now let's look at the supply of loanable funds. Remember, this is our savers. These are the investors that we have. So our shifters for the supply of loanable funds, there's 4 of them. We can have a change in private savings. So this is our savings behavior. If we have increase in savings, we're getting incentives, or we just don't want to spend money, that's increase in private savings. Our second shifter is public savings. So this is our government running out of surplus. This is our government increasing their savings. We also have foreign investment. So foreign investment is foreign countries, foreign companies saving money in the U.S., putting their money into the U.S. markets to be used for loans. And then our fourth shifter is expected profit off loans. So if we are expecting to have high rates of return off loans, so the expected profit of our loans is increasing, then we're going to start to see changes in the supply of loanable funds. So we'll draw a market at equilibrium again, and then we'll show the change. So we'll start with an increase in the supply. That's going to go to the right. So we have SLF2, Q2, and R2. So when we increase the supply of loanable funds, we are decreasing the real interest rate. And that makes sense. Supply of loanable funds is the availability of loans. This is creating the loans. So when we have more savings, we're going to have more loans, which will decrease the real interest rate. The more available a loan is, the lower the interest rate's going to be. Then decrease in the supply of loanable funds is going to go to the left. We have Q2 and R2. So when we decrease the supply of loanable funds, that's going to increase our real interest rate. So same thing, the supply of loanable funds is going down. We're not having people save money anymore, which is going to lower the amount of loans, which will then increase that real interest rate. So we'll do some more practice with loanable funds in class, but this is a great starting point, looking at our shifters of the demand and supply of loanable funds, and then of course learning to draw our market.